Welcome to First Bite. We are back with our midweek Detroit Lions podcast to bring you Lions content in the middle of the offseason with a special guest, as always. But first, my name is Jeremy Reisman. I am the editor-in-chief at Pride of Detroit. You can find me at Detroit Online on Twitter, and with me, as always, for First Bite, Ryan Matthews, senior editor of Pride of Detroit at Ryan_POD. Ryan, welcome, buddy.
I am one of two Ryans today.
You are.
And you get two for the price of one, man.
Yes, and some would say that's one too many, and I wouldn't say the guest is the one that's too many. But let me segue right into that before Ryan gets a chance to jump in there. You may know him as a staff writer for our friends at Big Cat Country, the Jaguars blog for SB Nation, but you might know him better as the managing editor of the Only Colors, the Michigan State blog for SB Nation. Ryan O'Blennis is here. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. Excited to be here.
So we obviously have you here for a couple of reasons. The Jaguars are a team of interest for two main reasons, really. One being that you guys have the first overall pick in the draft, which kind of holds the Lions hostage there. And two being DJ Chark. So we are going to split this podcast in half. First, talk about that draft pick because everyone loves draft talk, and then we'll get into some DJ Chark talk in the second half of this podcast. But let's start at the draft. The Jaguars have made a ton of moves that maybe suggest they're not in the offensive tackle market. Let's start with the move of franchise tagging Cam Robinson. Obviously, it's a short-term move. It's a one-year deal, but it's a heavy investment in terms of money. So how do you think that factors into the whole draft formula, and is it a move that you agreed with?
It is a move that I agreed with. I think I'm higher on Cam Robinson than a lot of people. He's certainly not one of the elite tackles in the NFL, but he's more than serviceable. And, I think he only allowed one sack last year, and he missed a few games, but, when he's healthy, he's pretty good tackle. Obviously with the Jaguars right now, the number one concern is protecting Trevor Lawrence, your number one asset, right? So I think tagging Robinson assured that, they had a suitable left tackle there, and that, they could have struck out in the free agent market, or they could have, not been as high on some of these tackles in the draft. So, and I do think, you mentioned it's a short-term move, which it is. They franchise tagged him last year too, so it was kind of a back-to-back thing, but it sounds like they're trying to work out a longer-term deal with him. We'll see if that gets done, but, I thought it was the right move personally.
And sticking with the idea of, Cam Robinson at tackle, they also added Brandon Scherf, to shore up the inside of their offensive line on the interior as well. And I guess that dovetails nicely into, does tagging Robinson and getting a guy like Scherf, does that completely take, Evan Neal and Ika Mekwanu off the table, number one for the Jaguars? Because it seems like there was a plan where, okay, the Jaguars tagged Cam Robinson. They could still take one of these guys and play him at guard and then kick him out to tackle. I mean, do either of those guys factor into the discussion at number one anymore for the Jaguars?
Yeah, I think it's still too early to rule anything out. This year is a lot different than last year when Jacksonville had the number one pick and everybody knew the entire time that it would be Trevor Lawrence. This year, there's a little bit of mystery to it. I think obviously they're probably leaning toward Aidan Hutchinson, defensive end, but I don't necessarily think that tagging Robinson and signing Scherf, would eliminate them from taking a tackle at the number one spot if they feel like, those guys, Neal, if they feel like Neal or Icky are guys that they can see as their franchise cornerstone, and they could even, play them at right tackle. But with that said, they also drafted Walker Little last year in the second round, who was a guy who I think they're high on. And they still had Juwan Taylor there, who's the starting right tackle. He's had a lot of struggles. I know a lot of the fan base might want to see a change there, but I think the team still believes in Taylor, and I think Walker Little could be that kind of swing tackle for them, and he could eventually be a long-term starter there. So, I think it does seem less likely that the pick's going to be an offensive lineman. For a while there, it seemed like it was leaning that way until they tagged Robinson. And especially with Doug Peterson now being the head coach, he loved to build his Eagle teams through the offensive line. So certainly, that's going to be a big emphasis for them. And if they think that what they have now is suitable and they don't need to take a guy there that early with that number 1 pick, then, I think the pick will be an edge rusher, but I wouldn't rule anything out just yet.
Well, let's talk about some edge rusher options for the Jaguars, because when the Lions, when it was assumed that the Jaguars were going to go offensive line, I think Lions fans had a pretty healthy debate over whether it was going to be Aidan Hutchinson or Thibodeau or Taven Walker, or Jermaine Johnson has even kind of snuck into that conversation a little bit. But at least from the outside looking in, it seems like the huge consensus is that it's Aidan Hutchinson for sure for the Jaguars. And, I like to say that Vegas odds aren't real, which is something that Ryan teases me about. But Vegas odds are ridiculously, like, it's like minus 400 Aidan Hutchinson right now, and I think everyone else is plus 400 or more. So from the inside out, is that how you perceive the situation to be? Is Aidan Hutchinson is kind of a lock right now?
Yeah, again, I wouldn't rule anything out or necessarily say he's a lock, but I would say, at this point, I'm thinking like 95% that the pick will be Hutchinson. I think a report from Albert Breer recently came out that Hutchinson only had one private workout schedule, and it was with the Jaguars. And then he canceled that after what he saw happen to David Ojabo in that freak accident at the pro day, which was very unfortunate. So I think the fact that he had just one workout lined up and it happened to be with the team that was number 1 overall, and he didn't, bother even scheduling with other teams, that probably means that, he's anticipating going there too. But again, it's just hard to say because, you got a new coaching staff, you got Trent Baalke still there as the general manager, but it's hard to get a read on them. But I would say that right now everything is pointing in the direction of Hutchinson, and the Jaguars are, they've really been looking for somebody to pair next to Josh Allen as another elite edge rusher. They've struggled, to get Allen a supporting cast member. They drafted Caleb Chase on, a couple years ago. He hasn't really worked out, and all the other guys they've tried to sign and bring on. So, I think we talked about how, the offensive line is still being a big need, but, maybe they have the pieces there already. Edge rusher is definitely a spot that Jacksonville needs to bolster right away if they plan on having any kind of success. So I think that's why, Hutchinson, who's considered the top overall prospect, not only as a defensive end, but by many in the draft, would be the guy. I don't know if I necessarily agree that Hutchinson is the best player. I'm going to try not to bring my Michigan State bias into this, but obviously I watched a lot of Hutchinson because I watched a lot of Big Ten games. Against Michigan State, he got to the quarterback pretty frequently, but then what happened was they completely neutralized him and took him out of the game, by just giving the ball to Kenneth Walker and running away from him. And, against Georgia, the guy was nowhere to be found. So I just thought that, he kind of disappeared in a lot of big moments, but also at the same time, he had a huge season. He had a very good combine. He has, everything you're pretty much looking for in a pass rusher and a guy that can be, that kind of 1B to Josh Allen's 1A. So I think he would be a good complement to Allen. And I assume that is going to be the pick as of right now.
Well, so two things to that. Like I agree that there's some spots where Hutchinson may have disappeared to an extent, but then again, against Ohio State, he shows up on the biggest stage, and that's the game that really pushes him to the forefront to him potentially being the number 1 pick. All up until that point, it's Kayvon Thibodeau, and then Hutchinson enters the chat. So the last question I have to ask you, Ryan, is where are you feeling right now in terms of where the Jaguars direction, where their franchise is headed with Trent Baalke? Because I think that as Lions fans, we're pretty familiar with how much pressure Ryan Pace felt last year with the Chicago Bears. And there were a lot of very kind of win now moves, especially with him and Matt Nagy tied at the hip there. How much pressure do you think is on Trent Baalke to A, get a contributor at number 1 right out of the gate, or B, I mean, any rumblings of the Jaguars being in the market to move back from that number 1 pick?
I think there's a lot of pressure on Baalke because the fan base kind of despises him. I don't know if you guys saw the whole clown movement, but literally Jaguars fans were dressed up as clowns and attended the last regular season game in some sort of effort to make a statement that they wanted Trent Baalke fired. He's not very popular with the Jags fan base. With that said, I thought, I kind of liked how aggressive the team was in free agency, and, they were able to fill some of those holes that way. So with the number one pick, I think now they've given themselves the option still to take, is it Hutchinson? Is it Walker even? I heard, I have heard that the team is high on Walker too. The other edge rusher who had the huge combine out of Georgia. So that's a possibility. You still get your tackles there and everything. But yeah, I do think, obviously if you draft a guy number one overall, you're expecting that guy to come in and not only be an immediate contributor, but be a difference maker for your team. And, with you guys are well familiar with, the Lions and their situation, but the Jaguars roster as it currently stands is not going to win many games. So, I think a lot of these free agent moves and, who you get in the draft and things like that is going to dictate really how much success they have. And I think this season, I don't expect them to still be any kind of contender, but what they need to do is make progress toward, taking that next step with Trevor Lawrence at the helm and eventually, becoming a contender once again. So, and then as for trading the number one pick, Baalke was asked about that at the combine, and, he said the team is open to it. As we talked about, there's not really the one guy in the draft that you have to have. So if there was any draft that you might want to trade a number one pick and get, kind of a king's ransom for it, it'd probably be this one. He said he's open to it, but they're also comfortable staying there and making the pick. He said he doesn't quite know what it would take, what kind of haul it would take for them to actually give up that pick. But, he said they're always willing to be shopping it around. I'm sure they're going to have phone calls. I don't know if they'll actually end up doing it or not, but basically, that option is on the table too. To me, I think the two most likely options right now is either Hutchinson at number one or they trade it. I think those are, probably the two biggest options for the team right now.
It sounds like you have at least a little bit of trepidation for Hutchinson as a prospect. So I'm just curious on a personal level, who would you like to see the Jaguars entertain with the first overall pick?
Honestly, I was a lot of the time throughout the process, I was higher on Thibodeau.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't got the sense that the Jaguars are. I don't know for sure. Like I said, I've heard that they are high on Walker and they're high on Hutchinson. So I think Thibodeau is the kind of player who, people question his motor and things like that, but he probably has the highest ceiling. Hutchinson is a guy who has, the highest floor. You know what you're going to get with him. He might not be a superstar, but he's going to probably be a difference maker. And so, I wouldn't be mad at all if they drafted Hutchinson. Like I said, I think he would be a good compliment to Allen. I don't know if he is number one overall pick worthy, but I think, when you look at this class overall, and it's a lot.
Who is, right?
Right, exactly. So there are a lot of different options there, and I definitely understand why Hutchinson is at the top of the list. And if he becomes a Jaguar, then I'm going to follow him, report on him, root for him. So whatever happens, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of wide open to me.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true Spartan fan.
I got one more before we head to break, and it's kind of off topic here, but I do want to talk a little bit about the Jaguars free agency spending spree because, Lions fans haven't really been on the end of just like the madness that the Jaguars seem to be going through, but they've had some off seasons in which they've spent a lot. And I know being on the inside when that happens, like, drums up a lot of excitement. From the outside, tends to draw a lot of criticism because, spending a lot in free agency, generally speaking, not usually a great plan for success. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are kind of overall on just the Jaguars free agency spending spree.
Well, my thing with that is, I mean, if you have the cap space, then spend it. Like, basically, people were really mad about the Christian Kirk deal, but when you look at the contract details, it's essentially a 2-year deal with an out after that for the team. So yeah, I mean, he definitely got way more money than I was expecting. I knew that the Jaguars were going to target him heavily, and I expected him to sign with the Jaguars. From what I had heard going into free agency, I heard that he was looking somewhere between like $15 million or up a year. So he did get quite a nice chunk of change, but maybe he will be that guy with Trevor Lawrence that could be the number one receiver. And if it pans out, then, and he ends up having a really good year and a good career there, then nobody's going to bat an eyelash at, what his contract was. And, they went out and they got Scherf and they paid a lot of money for him, but he was one of the top guards on the market. So that's just what the market dictates at these positions. And, they also lost Andrew Norwell, who actually ended up going to Washington. So it was kind of like those two traded spots. But and then, they signed a bunch of other guys. They got Darius Williams, the cornerback from the Rams, and Zay Jones, another wide receiver who came over from the Raiders. And quite a few, they got Foye Oluokun from Atlanta, the linebacker. I'm pretty excited for that one. They paid decent money for him, but they ended up cutting Miles Jack. So, I think they must think that this guy's the real deal with I know Mike Caldwell, the new defensive coordinator, really wanted him, as his linebacker. And it'll be interesting to see who they probably need to draft somebody now to put next to him. But, yeah, you got all these different positions that they brought in, and, they're all areas of needs. This roster needed to be bolstered all over the place. And that basically, like, I had no problem with the amount of money that they were spending on these guys, because that's what it costs to sign free agents, in 2022 with the cap space, always rising. So it is what it is. If you want to compete, because the Jaguars have been so poor at drafting, they haven't been able to build their team that way. This is how you have to start doing it, is, it's through free agency. So
try it another way.
Yeah, right.